All right, Darren Dreger joins us on the show this morning, brought to you by Pro-Am Sports. And if you've not yet subbed to our YouTube channel, please do. Dregs came back from Boston on Friday, thought, get in on a Monday morning. Everybody'd still be loving the McDavid overtime winner and all that. And then the Oilers get pumped twice over the weekend, and it's just disaster mode this morning. It was not good. How much should we just look into this and go, they hadn't played in a while. They start season slow. They're not great after Christmas, and they're just not good coming off a layoff. Is it more than that, do you think?
Well, it's easy to dismiss and say, okay, well, the Oilers are flat. That's abundantly obvious, but there's being flat, and then there's giving up 13 goals in 2 games. And so where's that flatness? Well, it's across the board. It is. It's, the top end guys, primarily Connor McDavid. Sure, there's going to be a bit of a letdown when you come out of that environment in scoring the overtime winner to give Canada the championship over Team USA. But there's enough talent assembled on that roster where those 2 games shouldn't happen and arguably can't happen. But, I think that it was somewhat predictable that most teams, if not all teams, would have some sort of a reset coming out of the break, right? Even for the guys that didn't participate in the 4 Nations, you're staying in shape, but you're not skating every single day. Some guys took advantage of the break and had some fun in the sun and all of that. So I think that it's concerning when you look at how lopsided these 2 games are, and the needs are starting to, again, show themselves, right? You're looking at that blue line. Klingberg in this 2 games, since coming out of the break, starting to look like the mobility issues are still there.
Yeah.
The jury remains out. But beyond that, the wants and the needs of the Oilers remain. And I think when you have games like this, you guys tell me in that market, does it restart the narrative or the questioning of the goaltending, and whether or not that's an area that Stan Bowman and Oilers brass have to consider between now and 11 days away from the March 7th trade deadline?
Well, we can 100% answer your question, and the answer is yes. Fans have basically turned on Skinner and Pickard for most of the season. This weekend certainly didn't help the conversation. So let me ask you, Dregs. Gibson and Vejmelka are names that are trending here on Oiler Twitter all the time. Is it reasonable to think that they will be trying to get somebody like this prior to the deadline for another deep playoff run?
Well, you have to at least have that conversation. And, I'm sure they've had it internally as a coaching staff, and that extends to management clearly. But then, Bowman is going to kick tires on every positional player. And I would think that has to include goaltending. And you're right. The John Gibson conversation has been out there a long, long time. Let's see what happens with Vejmelka and Utah. I know that there's been extension talks with the agents there, but Billy Armstrong has to weigh, okay, what does the market look like if we actually throw him out into that market versus are we okay with extending him based on all the comps that are out there? And there's a number of them, including Kevin Lankinen, who just extended with Vancouver. Ray and I talked about this on a podcast late last week, and it was Friday, actually, after the 4 Nations face-off, and wondered, I've been among the chorus of media people talking about the possibilities in St. Louis. Okay, Braden Schen's name has been out there, right? Not in a shopping capacity, but if you're Doug Armstrong and you know that you've got to make some changes for a better future in St. Louis, well, that's why you have those conversations about potentially putting your captain out there. And Parayko's name always seems to find his way into, trade conversations. And that's a curious one given where he's at in his contract. And I'm less believing that. What about Jordan Binnington? Could Armstrong parlay the success of Jordan Binnington in that championship final overtime win into getting a hell of a return for an experienced veteran goaltender? Don't know. But, again, for any team that has a goaltending need, I feel like those are the conversations that you have to have.
Yeah, the interesting spot for teams who decided they do need a goalie, and maybe Oilers management thinks they are one of them, is that there's not like a list of 10 or 12 guys, right? There's going to be maybe a handful of goalies that you would realize are legitimate targets. So the price because of that. Like, what do you
It'll be a premium.
Yeah, right. They'd have to pay a pretty good price, I would think.
Yeah, unless you get right down to, the 7th of March, it's the 11th hour, the 3:00 Eastern bell is about to ring and you sneak in under the wire. But, in fairness to the Oilers goaltending, Rashog and I have talked about this. It's the same goaltending tandem that helped you to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. So we need to be careful not to entirely throw these guys under the bus. And, but again, it's all in part of, okay, well, you did so many great things as an organization last year, but didn't win. So you have to be willing to have these conversations and investigate every possibility so that you can at least feel like you've strengthened every position, if required, to win that Stanley Cup, because clearly that's the goal here.
Darren, Alex Ovechkin looking pretty fresh off the break there. I think clocking close to a 5-minute shift Saturday. He had 9 shots yesterday, just 3 goals. Yeah, probably could have bagged double that. Just your thoughts, and do you see him kind of, getting to that Gretzky mark prior to I think it's the game against the Islanders sometime down the way, but the expected time where he reaches that, I mean, he can't be stopped right now.
Well, 13 shy of the record. Come on. What has he scored 29 times in 41 games?
It's insane.
With the injury, too.
With the injury, a broken leg. I mean, this guy, he is going to break the record this year. He is. This is the Mark Messier guarantee. Ovechkin is going to break the record. And just look at what he's accomplished across his career. And that will, of course, be the shiny jewel in the crown. But I think I read this morning, 200 goals in 3 different decades. And when you say it out loud, it sounds absurd because automatically, well, he hasn't played for 30 years. Okay, but you go into the 2000s, the 2010s, and now here we are in 2025. Even the way that the empty netter unfolded for him last night, doesn't that feel like that's all just part of what the special season is for Alex Ovechkin? Yeah. I mean, Emerson breaks a stick and Ovechkin has the freebie, but he's still got to find the net from 140 feet, something like that. Like, it wasn't a tap in by any stretch of the imagination. Then you look at the other 2 goals. Well, one is a snapshot on the rush, and the other one is that vintage one-timer from the left circle. So I joked with Ray again on the podcast last week because I think they had the Saturday Capitals afternoon game, one of 14 games in the return to the NHL. I said, you watch. I said, Ovi's going to have a 5-goal game. And he laughed. Well, he didn't. Clearly he didn't, but he made up for it at the Oilers' expense yesterday.
Yeah, it's just remarkable seeing him not limp to this record. Only Leon Draisaitl has more goals per game this year than Alexander Ovechkin. It's remarkable, man.
Look, I keep wondering about his future, right? We've talked about it before. The storybook conclusion to this man's run. So, hey, this Capitals team is the real deal. Yeah. They're going to contend for a Stanley Cup, and we don't know what management is going to do to help bolster, if anything. They're pretty good. So he breaks the record, potentially contends, maybe wins a Stanley Cup. I believe he's got a year left on his contract. I feel like, and this is just raw, pure speculation, wouldn't that be the time you just go, I'm out? What's left? Unless you feel healthy enough that the idea of scoring 1,000 goals or, you feel like politically the landscape is changing and you've got a chance to vie for gold at the Olympics. Yeah. And that, we're a long way from the IOC and everybody making that call, but there are some scenarios around Ovechkin that are curious and could keep him going for a couple more seasons.
Dregs, 2 more places I want to go before we let you go. Mikko Rantanen, Carolina. What happens there in the next 2 weeks?
Yeah. Well, must watch for all of us, right? I've yet to find anybody in the executive business across the National Hockey League who truly understood why Carolina would pay the price and not have certainty in a contract extension with Mikko Rantanen. But, we're kicking sand after the fact. So here they are in Carolina, and I'm sure Tom Dundon is burning up the phone of Andy Scott, the agent, on a day-by-day basis, trying to cook this deal. And I know that they had a Zoom meeting during the break, they being the agents, with ownership and management of the Carolina Hurricanes. So, the one thing that doesn't change is Mikko Rantanen makes the call here. And let's not get caught up on that 8th here. Okay, it's not going to be chump change if he's commanding upwards of $14 million. But I don't know that matters as much to him. So if he's focused on free agency, then he's not worried about that 8th year. But if you're Carolina, maybe you can sweeten that trade between now and March 7th by, getting that contract done and creating that 8th year. So there are a couple of scenarios that include trade, and maybe one is an own rental. Carolina's a pretty good team. They weren't that against the Leafs on Saturday, but they're a pretty good team. Maybe they use them as an own rental and they roll the dice and they hope that they can convince them. They hope that they go deep into the playoffs and that helps convince Mikko Rantanen. Otherwise, it's a lot to pay for a rental player at this point.
And I certainly don't want to gloss over that junior hockey tweet you had from the weekend. What are the next steps here, do you think, for what's going on with junior hockey right now?
Well, I mean, anything is possible. And I got some feedback primarily from Western Canada, the Western Hockey League, because nobody seemed to know that these back channel conversations were happening. And I want to be very, very clear in saying that these are very preliminary talks. So the CHL and the National Hockey League had a meeting last week, and they talked about a lot of things. This wasn't the only thing on the agenda, but they talked about the landscape of expansion and growth in major junior hockey, and what does that look like? Right now, it's primarily based in Canada, right? The Western League, the Ontario League, the Quebec Maritimes League. What if you developed a more North American league, and what would that look like? And, the CHL is not going to be the savior of the USHL. They're not. They might cherry pick geographically some spots that they think are going to work. But how does that impact the existing teams? Because you start to worry a little bit about some of the smaller market clubs inside the Canadian Hockey League. So really the discussion is based on making sure that the CHL remains the top producing development league in the sport. And so all these decision makers, and we're talking about really the commissioners of each league, the CHL brass and the National Hockey League, who would direct and guide this process, as just having wide and open conversation right now. But definitely something we're going to watch moving forward.
As always, Dregs, we appreciate the time, man. Thanks a lot, and we'll do it again next week.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
There you go. That's Darren Dreger for Pro-Am Sports. They got those new Jays spring training hats now available at Pro-Am.